On today's World Insight, the Endless Frontier Act advanced through a procedural vote. Can this bill that provides $100 billion in funding for emerging technology tip the tech race between China and the U.S.? And we venture to a remote corner of Yunnan province, where we see how a family has recently bid farewell to extreme poverty.
好的生活慢慢来。
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Competition between the United States and China is heating up. The U.S. plans to bolster spending on research and development in technology and innovation. The Endless Frontier Act, first introduced last year, would invest $100 billion in science and education over a 5-year period. Washington wants to focus on areas such as artificial intelligence, semiconductors, biotechnology, and cybersecurity. The bill enjoys bipartisan support and passed the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation on May the 12th. It now awaits approval by the Senate. Experts describe it as a way for the U.S. to strengthen its security and compete with China. Really? Could it lead to fierce technology rivalry between China and the United States? Let's loop in our panelists from both countries. For the discussion on Endless Frontier Act in New York, Max Wolf, CEO of Systematic Ventures and Professor of Economics from the New School University. In Beijing, Gai Keke, Associate Professor from the School of Computer Science and Technology with Beijing Institute of Technology. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. For the Endless Frontier Act, I want to have your input. $110 billion likely to put into basic science and technological research. That is according to the Senate vote of this act. Professor Wolf, how far do you think this act will help the United States be able to achieve its next stage of scientific and technological research?
Look, I think we're still kind of waiting to see how this works out because it's not a completely finished product here. But I think having a national industrial policy like we once did and like most of the world does makes sense. I think trying to promote key industries, most countries are doing it. I think it makes sense. I think in some ways, although probably most of the politicians wouldn't like this too much, we're kind of copying some successes we've seen from China in terms of framing these national agendas. And I think it's a good idea for the United States to figure out what the most important industries are and make sure that they're getting attention and funding. Some of the language and conversation, I think, is needlessly confrontational, but I guess that's how things get politically done.
But the nature of this is very interesting. Is it more about the U.S. be able to gain back what they consider has lost over the years about its support to science and technological research with the rhetorical approach of, against China? Or this is mainly, from your perspective, a bill that is likely to be countering China as the sole purpose? Those are very different, I would assume.
For sure. Look, I think the rhetoric and what gets the political capital is more about countering China. And the reality is part of what we've seen the last few years around the world and in the United States is some of the difficulties with supply chain disruptions around the coronavirus, but some other issues, and the loss of some of our manufacturing base has become both a political issue and to some extent a national security and economic issue. Certainly, we have probably gone further than made sense in outsourcing production, but that's very much a global story. It's not a U.S.-China story. And the other part of the story is just that production is global, whether it's done in the United States or elsewhere. So it's not a sort of America versus Russia type scenario or America versus China. That's an old-fashioned political language, and maybe it still gets votes, but it pretty massively fails to understand the realities of a modern globalized economy.
Everything has been hyper politicized, one would say, in Washington, D.C., particularly when it comes to its relations with anything about China or related to China. So therefore, I want to ask you, Associate Professor Gai Keke, from your perspective as a Chinese scientist, how do you see the nature of this Endless Frontier Act that is ongoing in the legislative process in the U.S.?
Like, personally speaking, whether or not the act is passed, I believe it follows the demands of the United States. I don't think we should have any overreaction on it because like each country has its own R&D strategies. So therefore, I guess we just need to do our own work at our own pace.
What is China's work? What is China's pace? Let's just talk about the real nature of China's science and technological research and methods, and the overall blueprint China is trying to achieve. Mr. Gai.
Well, from the perspective of the computer science, I think we are making a plan for next 5 years. I mean, the 14-5 plan. Well, at this point, I think we are trying to develop our own advantages. For example, nowadays China has advantages in AI industries like natural language processing and computer vision, as well as UAVs and robots. So therefore, I think at the one hand we want to have more advantages in those fields, and on the other hand, we are trying to explore some areas that we don't have the core technologies. For example, the chip industry. Actually, our country, like China, the Chinese government, has a lot of benefit policies to encourage research organizations and enterprises to have some novel work, to have some cut-edge work.
AI is very interesting. If we could use that as an example for both of you gentlemen. AI is being considered as the infrastructure of today and the future. It's nothing mysterious about everything related to the latest development could be, related to AI or even included within the so-called artificial intelligence, ranging from algorithm to a lot of different areas. So if it is the infrastructure, how are we going to see the US and China be able to develop its own, shall we say, backyard of artificial intelligence? To me, that's a very interesting question and a mystery too. Professor Wolf, do you think Washington and other communities have figured out this, the decoupling, really?
Yeah, I don't think it's been all that well figured out. I mean, I do think the world just learned a lesson too, which is we mostly have shared problems, even if we have two different flags. And if we can work together on shared problems, we can cover a lot more scientific ground faster. Now, everything won't be equal, and we do have interests that are not identical, right, in the real world, but they're not that large, right? So I do think that we will do more and get further as humans and as advanced economies and as the two big economies in the world for the foreseeable future, if we can do a lot of things together. That being said, artificial intelligence has a political, as well as a military, as well as an economic component. We are going to see an impact in basic human thought work, like what the Industrial Revolution did for human physical work. Mechanization changed the relationship between human bodies and production, and artificial intelligence in the next 20 years will change the relationship between human thought and production outputs. So it's going to be pretty big. And if you're on the wrong side of this evolution, you could have a competitive disadvantage of epic proportion. That's true. On the flip side, most of the problems we're trying to solve are similar. And we know we're going to need new chips, new batteries, and new electric generation and storage to do it. And it's simply a bigger job than either country could or will do alone.
Right. I don't want to talk about the rhetorical correctness, which I'm sure everybody knows. When the world is united, there seems to be more wisdom and creativity. Putting that aside, let's just assume there's going to be decoupling. But then what can be done? What will be done to decouple, first of all, and be able to focus on our own systems, for example, China vis-a-vis U.S., be able to achieve much in terms of artificial intelligence. So let's play this quote in which Professor John Hopcroft, a Turing Award winner, talking about algorithm and how much he, as a scientist, a pioneering scientist, who didn't know about the future of algorithm, just to use as an example about the overall artificial intelligence. Take a look. What is likely to be the factors that's likely to drive AI development for the future?
We really don't know. I've got to tell you that the world is changing at a rate that I can't really grasp what the future is going to be. I mean, I think some of the key questions to ask are...
What are the key questions?
One of them would be, what percentage of the population is going to be needed to produce all the goods and services we need? And a lot of people conjecture it's going to be less than 25%. And if that's true, how are nations going to make sure that everybody has a standard of living? The other thing is, even if you're paying people, you don't want 75% of your population sitting around doing nothing. So how do you engage them in meaningful activity? These are questions that we're going to have to seriously consider.
Do you have some answers to a certain extent?
Not really.
So that's Professor John Hopcroft. One could consider one of the top minds of the world when it comes to computation science and also algorithm and AI. So even him would not be able to figure out what the future is likely to be. So may I ask you, Mr. Guy, if China and the United States really decoupled with one another, let's just say in AI, how would the two sides be able to approach the future?
I want to talk like 2 points. First, we need more application scenarios because in China, we usually emphasize the technology itself, but we actually need more work on combining or using technology in a correct scenarios. Because like in the States, actually the United States companies usually emphasize the industry itself. We are talking about the industrial internet. That means the internet should serve for the industry. So the technology needs to be used for supporting the industry. It's not like, because for the older generation, we emphasize the internet. The users on the internet are the important one. But in the future, the internet is one of the infrastructure of the industry. So that's why we're talking about the like blockchain as an infrastructure for the future network industry. So that's the first part. The other part is that we need to combine the AI technologies with other advanced technologies. For example, the cloud computing, blockchain, and even quantum computing, because it's about the future technologies. Nowadays, actually, we do have very good market for the cloud computing, and we do have very good foundation for blockchain. But the competition between like different technologies is still at the very beginning stage. We need a lot of work to improve those aspects.
But with government support, top-down approach, will that work to the scenarios, to the two future directions you just said?
We do have some method. Actually, our government encourage the scholars, I mean the professors, to visit in the process to find out the connections between the pure research and the applications of industrial products. In fact, in the past, we actually have very rare attempts on this, but nowadays we are encouraged to find out the connection or bridge up the research achievements with the products, especially for the digital products.
Professor Wolf, what do you think are some of the specific technological directions that the U.S. would like to approach and focus its resources on in this regard? Same question, but a different perspective from the U.S.
Sure. So I sit on the board of a few of the incubator and accelerators here, and we write AI. So internally. We do machine learning and AI, so sometimes I see it. I mean, I think I know what the United States is going to focus on broadly, and I think that a lot of Chinese interest in similar space, where some of the competition comes from, but sensor fusion and the Internet of Things, to have smart sensor chips, that's part of the reason that there's such an interest in all kinds of new chip technology, including affordable chips that don't drink a lot of electricity, that can send out and then process signal so that you can kind of have awareness of machinery and supply levels and inventory and how things are functioning.
Yeah.
That's the future of the automobile and the city. So that's a really big deal, Internet of Things. All the quantum computing, because it's really important to national security and the cryptography. Then obviously the computerized vision to replace human senses at scale, very, very rapidly at scale. I think that's going to be very, very important to a lot of people. We kind of know that. And then deep learning neural networks, both to monitor and also to constantly do recommendation engines and parsing. So to constantly upgrade and feedback information on how things are going. And if, the last generation of this was just to tally information and give it to humans to make decisions, the next generation is to have algorithms make those decisions
Right.
on much more information, much faster than humans can function.
Then how? It is being believed that the U.S. used to have a bottom-up approach, right? Which is, grassroots, industry investing and entrepreneurs investing and capitalists investing. But now, with more seems to be support coming from the federal level, at least going to National Science Foundation, are things likely to change? In other words, in the governance of scientific and technological research, is it likely to be turned in a very different way?
I think we're going to see more of a kind of coming together of government, industry, and academia in the United States, which have tended to kind of be in their own space and have communication and coordination problems that were sometimes pretty significant. And I think part of what's happened to the US decision making is there was a probably somewhat arrogant idea that we would always have more investment dollars chasing lots of smart people at the top universities. I think that advantage has shrunk a little bit. And I think in the last year or two, you've seen more long-term minded hardware and AI investment dollars actually going into Chinese early stage investment than into the US, where there tends to be a little bit of a more aggressive short-term business to consumer profit motivated investment. And so I think that's made some of the US authorities concerned to get the government, academia, and the private sector more coordinated than we've historically been. And you can just sort of see that here now. That's part of what this bill tries to do, to put money into harmonizing what's being done abstractly in academia and make sure that it has rapid commercialization, or to focus on the areas that have more rapid commercial applicability just to be competitive. And again, I don't think it's just with China. I think it's very global. I think it's South Korea. I think it's Japan. I think it's France, and I think it's Germany. I do think it's more than just sort of US and China.
Very interesting. But the question really is that money sufficient enough to be able to let the government have a bigger say about what to do in terms of direction? If you look at the overall investment in the US or coming from the US in artificial intelligence, it seems private sector, individual investors, entrepreneurs, and academia, they've already have their very clear turfs. So will the government have much say as a result of $110 billion, or maybe more related to this? Professor Wolf.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be less. Looks like it's getting pruned a little bit. Just to give you an idea, I mean, in the scope of the money being thrown around in American venture, this isn't that large. It's also a 5-year budget, so it's really more like 20% of that per year, whatever that turns out to be. And then a lot of it is a large investment in the National Science Foundation to kind of rework that. And there's robotics, there's manufacturing, there's academics, there's commercialization. So in terms of the total size of money kind of in American innovation and technology, it's not that large. It could have a large impact, but it's not that large. I think there's might be more symbolic change here than real, which is getting the government in a coordinating role in the sector and getting everyone culturally comfortable with the notion that that's what America needs to do to be competitive now. I think that might be the bigger story, but the symbolism here is going to be larger than the macroeconomic impact, at least for the first several years.
Now, of course, we know that this act has been updated to so-called the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act that is even bigger, with bigger areas of contents, but that will still in the legislative process. Having said that, though, there's one crucial question before we go. What about the role of politics and the geopolitics played in terms of encouraging or discouraging scientific and technological advances in our world today? We see some earlier examples. During the Second World War, there were competitions, and nuclear technology was an obvious result of that. Many still remember the nuclear bombs and how decisive it was in terms of creating a strategic advantage for the United States and others to get the Second World War nailed down. Now, later there was a Cold War, U.S. and the former Soviet Union competing, space war and many other areas. Some suggest it has managed to put human beings onto the moon. But others argue differently, saying, will this really help? Actually, it's distracting people, and it's also distracting resources to maybe some of the other directions. So that would bring even more benefits to the human being as a whole. These are two arguments. How do you see as scientists and as investors? Professor Wolf.
Yes, look, I think we're unambiguously better off working together here. I'm not sure we can work apart, but I would answer your good question with another point here, which people who get excited about the us versus them tend to forget. If we do embark on a different course, the Chinese course and the American course, if you will, then if one of us stumbles, they'll fall catastrophically behind. Whereas if we work together with small advantages and disadvantages and gaps, we'll end up more or less in the same place, which is better for humanity. It's also better for political stability. The other thing I'll tell you is we kind of have both case studies in the last year, I think. We can look to those. So we had international cooperation on the COVID medical response, sequenced by the Chinese scientists who gave the world a crucial head start and worked on by both Chinese and American pharmaceutical companies. That is to help humanity, because humanity gets COVID virus. I think in the next 20 or 30 years, we're going to have issues of climate, issues of global political stability, and issues of climate refugee and food insecurity that will give us the chance to come together as humans and conquer those, or to fall apart as various groups trying to score points at each other's expense. I think what ties us together is much greater than what separates us. And I would hope, for the sake of humanity, as well as for the United States and for people, whatever flag they're under, that we can work together, because I think the challenges will demand nothing less.
I see. Professor Guy from China.
I think a Cold War thinking is an old thinking. We need to have like postmodern thinking on the technology. Like for me, I want to talk about the technology, because developing technology is always a key. Nowadays, China also has like a moon projects. Now we have a Mars project. Developing such like high level advanced technology actually will bring a lot of benefits to individual lives. For example, we know Tesla is also building up the space network. So the technology used by the space network will be used for the next generation of the network. During the process of like different projects, the Moon or Mars projects, we actually solve a lot of problems for the next generation of the network. So it happens to a lot of like different technical domains. So that's why we need to have like different advanced projects.
Very interesting. To me, it's a resourceful conversation. I want to thank both of you, Max Wolf and Guy Keke, for joining us. Thank you so much. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Coming up, we venture to a remote corner of Yunnan province where we see how a family has recently bid farewell to extreme poverty, how they've been trying to do it, and do it well.
我们好的生活慢慢来。
Welcome back. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. At the end of 2020, China achieved the goal of eliminating extreme poverty by improving the livelihood of nearly 100 million people. In today's episode of Farewell Poverty, I visited a mountainous village in Nujiang Prefecture of southwest China's Yunnan province, which is regarded as a wild bird's paradise. There I witnessed the changes to villagers' lives brought by tourism and their thoughts about the relationship on poverty alleviation and ecological protection. Quite an interesting one. Take a look. It is a bird's paradise. Long-billed wren babbler, Sichuan wagtails, and Hudson redstart, and more than 200 other species. In this remote and isolated valley conceals one of the planet's most unique biological hotspots. It's where the Nu River runs through southwest China's Yunnan province. Bird watchers and photographers from all over the world dream of visiting here to catch a glimpse of rewarding and unforgettable snapshots. The lives of local villagers there, though, have been challenged by extreme poverty. Until recent years, when local ethnic minority farmers learned to offer their service to tourists and change their fortunes through their own merit. 中华大哥，四妞大姐在吗？
在的。
你好，
你好，
谢谢啊，谢谢，你
辛苦
好，
了
四妞大姐，
辛苦了
哎，这是咱家呀，
对对，
带我进去看看吧，
好
好吧
好的？
哎，哟，还有我们的小宝贝儿，你好。That's at least what this family did. Living an extremely simple life, they had been suffering from extreme poverty from the very beginning. And this shabby tent used to be their old home, where they now could stay during the daytime as they are close to the bird watchers deep in the mountains. 来，你也来，一起。Li Zhonghua, the husband, suffered from a rare disease as a child. His family could not afford quality health care back then. He almost lost his ability to speak. Li Siniu, the wife, she married Zhonghua 22 years ago.
平时嘛，他又做菜、做饭，理娃娃，我是出去干活这的。
干啥活儿？
干那个找猪草啊，理地啊，做玉米啊这的。
哦，重活都你干呀？
啊，
他干，
他帮助你哈。
对，家里面做活都是大部分他来干。我这么个残疾人，而且没什么家庭很贫困，很穷，他嫁给我就感谢他。
当时怎么想的？嫁给他？
没什么的，我要就一辈子过上和媳妇，这心里就满足了，这样想的。
那你这个每天去 鸟塘工作需要多长时间啊？
一天一次去的话，他这个打扫卫生啊，烤虾话下去就是1个小时吧。
1个小时
啊，一天就2个小时。
哦
2个小时。
有几个摄影师啊？
今天3个人。
3个人。
4个人。我觉得那么好。
Three bird watchers have known Zhonghua and Sinyu for quite some time. Some casual chats among them proved their bond.
习不习惯不知道。
习惯和拍鸟物外，我们几乎都是带着面包就吃了，哪有？
时间不长，3年也不到，3年不到吧这。
原来从打鸟的变成护林员了。
Some locals used to hunt wild birds. Now more tourists come to see the wild birds. That's a support to the local economy. They will help protect the birds and other wildlife as well.
It can help raise people's awareness in ecological protection through bird watching.
Keeping the wild birds is not allowed.
What about bird watching spot like this?
I think that's okay.
不太大。有些人认为这个鸟啊，包括它的本身。Some would argue with more tourists coming in, there would be some impact on birds' breeding and habitat. What do you think? 怎么看这种观点啊？
他们因为原则上吧，这就是不要过于这个在。
I think we should not feed birds too frequently. That may change their habit and their survival skills.
Li Zhonghua's day is busy. Besides supporting the bird watchers and photographers, he also has a lot of house errands. I try to follow him every step of the way, not disturb his daily routine, which is important for his family income. The household has a small piece of land for planting crops. Besides, they also raise livestock and other various ways to make a living. 孩子去哪里了？
上高中。
想让他考大学吗？
想。
想啊。要上大学，掏得起钱吗？
是没钱也是想想办法嘛。
怎么想办法呀？
该带嘛带，该寄嘛寄这样嘛。
供一个大学生要多少钱啊？
可能是7、8万吧。
不容易啊。
不容易。
现在开始攒钱了。
还是想找，还是现在也还找不到一些。
不着急，不着急，慢慢来哈。好的。现在咱们家是做点什么生意呀？
在家里嘛，养养鸡啊，养养猪啊，就是这样。还有种玉米这些。
种玉米啊。那一年能这样挣多少钱啊？能够花吗？有些时候嘛也不够花一点点，但是还是慢慢的来，我自己这样想的。不着急啊，不着急，别着急，慢慢来，我们好的生活慢慢来，是吧？你最想要的什么样的生活？我最想要的是，希望还是这个小的这个也是可以好好的
培养，上学，这梦想就这样。
有没有走出咱们县里去城里看看，去省里看看？
喜欢嘛，喜欢，但是没有文化，没有知识嘛，就是哪里去都去不成。
谁说的？谁说的？孩子们长大了，他可以帮你啊。是吧？
是。
哎，想去吗？
想去的。
回头坐汽车、坐火车，是吧？甚至也许哪天咱也能坐上飞机呢，哈。
好的。太感谢你们了。
谢谢你。After all the work, the family finally could have a moment to relax. They decided to take me to their new home, built on top of the hill, just a few hundred meters away from their old tent. For families like that of Zhonghua and Sinyo, it was almost impossible to afford a new house on their own. But in recent years, the local government offered them 40,000 yuan altogether as funds to support families in extreme poverty. That was a gigantic amount for them. The family used the money to settle their debts and build a new house. 还要盖新房吗？
这边，这个上面。
在这儿盖新房？
准备盖，但是。
Sinyo told me that they are working to build a small new building right in front of the new home, so they can accommodate bird watchers. That means better income for the family, a must to fulfill their new dream. 行，你们一家三口先在这儿休息吧，哈，那我们先走了啊。好，拜拜，再见啊，再见。Bidding goodbye to the family of 3. I rushed to meet Yuan Kai-yu, a local entrepreneur who organizes and trains local families like that of Zhonghua and Sinyo to build up the local tourism industry. We caught him up along a mild stretch of the New River. Today I visited the Zhonghua family. Are there many households like theirs?
Yes, there are many households just like him. They were not convinced at first if the program was too new to yield profits. We visited Zhonghua several times, trying to convince him. In the end, he was convinced, began to ask about our plan, and joined our initiative to build a sanctuary.
Ever since tourism became one of the pillars of the local economy, what's the environmental impact on birds?
In the past, when we went up the mountain to inspect the birds, we often encountered dead birds on the roadside. After thinking about it, we found most of them starved to death. What we fed them is enough for the birds to last through winter. We used to feed them with coarse grain. Now, we are planting flowers and grasses to maintain the natural habitats. After years being with these birds, it seems that we've fallen in love with them. Villagers are now more aware of protecting wildlife. Only when birds are in harmony with nature that tourists want to come and visit. Then the local tourism industry can flourish. I think the happiest thing is to drum up villagers' awareness in protecting biodiversity.
You also run training courses for the local villagers, right?
Yes, there are around 500 to 600 local villagers who have received our training. Our training class is customized. Whatever our villagers want to learn, we'll try to accommodate. We now have chef training, Mandarin language training, and biodiversity knowledge training, and bird feeding protection training. All these courses are free, partly thanks to the local government's support.
According to the latest official figures, families living in the area have all been lifted out of extreme poverty. But after getting rid of extreme poverty, how can we achieve rural revitalization in the real sense? How can the people completely bid goodbye to poverty?
I'm very confident, and I think government, institutions, and departments, especially the CPC policies, are all supportive. I believe poverty alleviation along the New River has been done for the best interest of the people. It was a challenging process, but as President Xi says, the good days are yet to come. I am a private entrepreneur. I hope the government can grant more preferential policies for companies helping with poverty alleviation. We hope to continue our efforts, graduating from poverty alleviation to the next stage of rural revitalization. I hope all our villagers would not fall back into poverty anymore.
I also heard from others that you were a migrant worker yourself and only later returned to your hometown now.
Yes, I used to run a small business in the transport industry. After sharpening my skills as a private entrepreneur in Zhejiang province, I came back here, my hometown, along the New River. I realized this was such a beautiful place, but there was limited imagination for prosperity because the infrastructure was bad. Connectivity was tough. From the bottom of my heart, I wanted to help because this is where my home is.
I am on the road again. It has been a terrific day. The New River runs fast and slow at different stretches, and the well-built roads now can take you to all directions. There's a will, there's a way. That's what I learned from folks I met in Sanhe village along the New River, one of the region's most magnificent hotspots for biodiversity. Let's wish all the families there, as well as the beautiful piece of land, the best. And the birds are still singing. That's my trip to Sanhe village in southwest China's Yunnan province. Tomorrow we'll bring you a roundtable discussion from ambassadors from around the world sharing their insights on poverty alleviation, sitting in the front of a rural village in Yunnan. Stay tuned, and that's all we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.